Maryland star Pharrell Payne was taken off the court on a stretcher and ultimately to the hospital after this very awkward and painful-looking fall as he came down from his dunk earlier today against Marquette. In this video, we'll take a closer look what exactly could have happened here, talk about management of this injury in this acute situation, and what to expect for the basketball star going forward. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Sutterer, and the goal in this channel is to teach more about the medical side of the sports world. Now, we don't cover a lot of hip injuries. Hip injuries are not something that is super common to see in the sports world, football, basketball, or otherwise. Definitely the concern here for Payne is, I think, a right hip injury. There's a lot going on here in this position. Of course, we see his awkward angle of the knees. We see the feet, the way his legs are kind of abducted outwards to the side. But as he's coming down, rolling over to the side, what we ultimately see him grab is at the side of his right hip, and that seemed to be the area that the medical staff was focusing on. And I think when we look at the mechanism, the injury potential here, I think the hip makes the most sense of what to focus. So here as Payne comes down from this dunk, right, the point of allowing players to hang on the rim is so that they can stabilize themselves, get to a safe position. But unfortunately, as Payne comes down, you'll see he inadvertently catches the Marquette player's leg right there with his left foot. In this position, his body is trying to react suddenly to stabilize, to basically extend the limbs out to prevent any more serious falls. And so as he does that, his left leg slides backwards behind him here. We see his right leg come plant. If you look at the position of his trunk is already flexed forward, meaning bending forward over the waist towards his leg. And then as he just continues forward, that left leg slips backwards. He lands, and all that momentum carries him into this extreme hip flexed abducted position. So we can't see it perfectly well because of the score bug here, but basically what we're looking at in terms of the positions applied, the forces applied through his joints, not really much applied through the left side, but here that right leg out towards him, his chest coming down towards his knee is going to put his hip joint into flexion. And it almost looked like he hit his head on the court. That's how far his knee was flexed up towards his chest as he's falling forward with his momentum coming down. So this is going to put a lot of stress through, in particular, the hip joint. We can then see as he rolls back across here, some twisting, some torquing in the knee, the ankle potential for injuries there. But I think it's that extreme amount of forward hip flexion that potentially could have caused something like a fracture, maybe even subluxation, dislocation to his hip joint. We'll take a look at our biodigital anatomy tool, go through management of something like this acutely, why he was stretchered off the court. But first, I'm gonna give a quick shout out to the sponsor of our video. Today's video is sponsored by AG1. I used to struggle to get all my necessary vitamins and minerals through Whole Foods alone. But with AG1, I no longer have to worry or stress about that. AG1 is the daily health drink that combines your multivitamin, pre and probiotics, superfoods, and antioxidants into one simple green scoop. Simply add 1 scoop in the morning to 8 to 12 ounces of cold water to get 75 plus vitamins, minerals, probiotics, and whole food sourced ingredients right away to start off your day. The mix is really nice and also has a delicious taste. Right now, if you click the link down in the description or scan the QR code on screen, you can claim your free welcome kit. You'll get a bottle of vitamin D3 K2, a shaker bottle, and a sample pack of all 3 new AG1 flavors. That's right, they've now got tropical, citrus, and berry flavored AG1 to choose from. Look, we all know how stressful and busy life can be, especially with the holidays approaching, and it's easy to forget about your diet and to forget about doing these little things to help support your body's health. The simple daily habit of drinking AG1 will help with immune support, gut health, energy support, and filling in any of those nutrition gaps that you might have. So again, click the link down below or scan the QR code to get that free welcome kit and take advantage of this great opportunity to help step up your nutrition game. Thank you again to AG1 for sponsoring today's video, and let's get back to our learning. As we look at our biodigital anatomy tool here and focus on the muscles and the joints of that right lower leg, the right hip, remember the position, his trunk is going to be pointed in this direction, so that's going to be flexion. And at the same time, his leg is abducted, meaning it's going outwards. What that's going to do is it's going to put tension on the muscles here on the inside portion of his thigh. So if we're talking about a muscle injury, this could absolutely cause potential for a muscle strain, specifically of these inner groin muscles, the adductors, muscles like the gracilis, the sartorius, and also because of that forward flexion, we have to worry about pull on the hamstrings just from excess stretch. Again, because as your body rotates forward, that's going to also cause some rotation in the ischium and the pelvis, and that can put excessive stress on the hamstrings. So if we go back and look at that position again here with the video replay, Remember, in this position as we come down, he's already starting to go into that forward trunk flexed position. That trunk coming forward, the hip coming up towards his chest is going to put his hip in an awkward position to put stress on his joint. If we zoom all the way into the ball and socket of the right hip joint, your hip is a very deep, a very stable joint, right? It can move in a lot of directions, but it's a very deep socket with that ball. So it's extremely hard to dislocate your hip joint compared to, say, dislocating your shoulder, because the shoulder is more like a golf ball sitting on a flat tee. There's not as much socket to cover the ball and keep things nice and stable. But what can happen is, if you imagine, again, that femur coming all the way up this direction, the trunk compressing downwards, that ball and socket is going to get flexed up to the extreme terminal range of motion. And if you combine that with the force of the player coming down, the trunk coming forward, you're going to get an excessive amount of compression, a excessive amount of compressive load through the ball and the socket as that front part is wanting to jam or pinch together. Think about when you hyperextend your knee, right? The front part of the knee goes forward as the joint hyperextends. The front part of the bones bang and contuse together. That's the same sort of thing that this position is going to cause to the hip joint. You're going to get a lot of compressive forces through, in particular, this anterior front part of the hip joint. And so the first thing that I would be concerned about evaluating this acutely would be a potential dislocation, subluxation of his hip. And then next, a fracture to the hip socket or to the ball of the hip. And then, better case scenario downstream from that, something like a labrum or a cartilage tear. Whenever the hip dislocates, I will say you typically have to have some load that comes up axial through the thigh, through the acetabulum, to almost make it want to pop out the backside of the socket. Typically, a hip fracture dislocation is going to be posterior, meaning the ball of the hip goes backwards relative to the socket. If you think of the classic picture of Bo Jackson, where he plants in that hyper flexed with the leg straight position, all that force is going up through the hip joint, pushing this ball back posterior through the acetabulum. Here we don't see that as much with Payne, right? We're seeing him come forward, but we're not seeing him land with a lot of axial load up through the hip. His knee is in this bent position, and so as he comes down and lands, the force is not necessarily going posterior through the hip joint. It's more so coming up combined with the trunk coming downward. So I don't think we saw a hip dislocation, but certainly anytime you're going out to acutely evaluate an athlete with that severe of hip pain, you have to make sure you're looking for a hip joint dislocation. Typically, what will happen with a hip dislocation is the leg will sit in a position where it's a little bit rotated and often shorter than the uninjured side because of how it's gone backwards through the socket. It doesn't look like they're concerned about hip dislocation here. As he's laying on the ground, we don't really see that classic position. Here we can kind of look back and see as they're evaluating him, they're kind of again pushing on the right side of his hip. We see them very quickly make the symbol to call for the cart to come out. We see the fist go up. Again, universal symbol there. Get the EMS crew out here. We got to get him off the court. We of course then saw him taken off the court on a stretcher, and at this time it is nice to see that his feet and his legs are in a normal position. So here you can catch both toes are pointed upwards. That's good. If there was a hip dislocation, one foot's going to be rotated outwards or inwards depending on the direction of the dislocation. It's also going to be shorter than the injured side, and so here the fact that his feet are in a neutral position, both feet are pointed upwards, is good. Now this doesn't mean that the hip wasn't dislocated and they successfully reduced it before getting him on the backboard. That very well could have been the case, but it's very good at least to see that as he was taken off on the stretcher, the joint was not dislocated, because this is a nice normal position to be in. Remember, you're not just putting people on stretchers because of stability to the spine or to the neck, the back. Sometimes just because of their severe amount of pain and inability to walk or weight bear, you might be worried about trauma to the pelvis, fractures to the pelvis where you don't want them to put any weight through. A backboard is a very appropriate thing, not so much for the stabilizing aspect like with a neck injury, but just for the safety of getting them off the court quickly into the ambulance. Now, yes, if you've got an unstable pelvis fracture, severe hip fracture, backboard's going to help keep things nice and stable. So this was more so recognition of, hey, this pain is severe, there's concern about the joint, let's not waste any time here, let's get them off to the hospital to get some imaging and look and see what's going on. Now, other possible injuries to think of here, right? We all saw the focus on the hip, but multiple things can occur. This position where the knees are kind of splayed outward like this with this severe amount of, I'd call this a little bit of a valgus load with the foot kind of swinging up that way. This is not as concerning for something like an ACL. Typically, if anything, this is going to cause more of an MCL injury or maybe the meniscus. Usually with a meniscus, with an ACL, there needs to again be some load that comes up through the joint from the foot being planted or the foot at least stuck on the ground. The fact that, again, his feet are not anchored, I'd be very surprised if there's a severe ankle sprain because, yes, we see that awkward position where the feet roll inward. But remember, if you look at the entirety of the leg, the ankle is not rotated relative to the tibia in a way that's going to sprain the ankle ligaments. If anything, potentially MCL at the knee, but based on where he was grabbing with the hip, that again, extreme amount of forward flexion causing compression, pinching in the front of the hip joint. Number one concern you'd worry about, hip dislocation. Number two, hip fracture. And then number three, I think best case scenario, just contusion or injury to the labrum. Yes, a lot of surrounding soft tissues. The groin muscles, the adductors that we talked about on the inside are going to be stretched, while the muscles on the outside are going to be compressed together. But we didn't see him grab at the inside groin area. We saw him grabbing kind of on the outside of the hip, which would be a very common place to reach and to grab if you were dealing with something like a hip joint fracture, hip subluxation, etc. It is very much too early to tell what to, look at here, prognosis in terms of, the rest of this season, career going forward. If this was a hip dislocation, I think that's the worst case scenario. Hip dislocations can be very traumatic, cause damage to the cartilage, can impair the blood flow to the hip. We all saw what happened with Bo Jackson. That was at a different time in medical care where we much, have better treatments now. We saw Tua come back and he's having a great NFL career after his dislocation. So a hip dislocation is by no means like a career-ending injury, but it can certainly be a career-threatening injury. If there's a significant fracture around the pelvis or around the hip that requires surgery, again, when you get into these large joints, these weight-bearing joints, fractures around the joint can equal damage to the cartilage, and that's more of what we worry about long-term, assuming there's no compromise of blood flow to the bone. Muscle injuries, tendon injuries, ligament injuries, as bad as they are, can typically be fixed, can typically be repaired. But even if you repair and stabilize a bone, you still have probably done some trauma to the cartilage, which can be a bigger thing long-term. So I think very much too early to tell what to expect going forward. Hopefully we get some updates here throughout this weekend into next week so that we can get a better sense of just hopefully his well-being going forward, but then also what to think from a basketball perspective. Let me know as always any questions or comments down below. Thanks as always for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.